Hello, entrepreneurs. Joe DeChara here once again with another amazing version of Joe DeChara Presents. And tonight we have a new series. I am going to go through my S-Corp escapades. As you may know or may not know, that I'm coming out with the new itty bitty book on S-Corps. And a lot of stuff that I do today is all based around S-Corp creation because I have learned over the years through personal experience that S-Corps are the absolute best way for an operating entity to do business. But rather than get into the whole, debate, I think that I'm just going to go through all of the chapters in my book one night at a time, over the course of a couple of weeks, because it's actually 15 chapters. And I think by the end of it, there will be information out there really about what S-Corps are all about, because I believe that they are the most underutilized and most powerful tax vehicle that a small business owner can use. And it's almost become like a no-brainer. And what I did was, besides the fact of, the thousands of people, business owners, tax problems, audits, forensic accounting, despite all of that, I said, let me go back to what an S-Corp really is. Why was it created? Who was it created for? Who benefits from it? And why isn't everyone using it? Because that is the question that has mystified me since I came across this fact, folks, and this is a fact. There are over 30 million businesses in the United States. 30 million. Over 25 million are what the SBA calls non-employer firms. Now, what I assumed over the years was that meant that they were just S-Corps that only employed themselves. I mean, they didn't employ anyone else. Don't ever assume anything. Because about 2 years ago, when I looked at that term, I said, no, what do they mean non-employer firms? Well, what they were talking about was sole proprietors. And I've been doing this a long time, and that fact completely went by me, probably because of the bubble that I've been in as a CPA, really targeting established businesses. That's where my disconnect came. My whole career was spent targeting existing business owners that were already incorporated. They had already reached that plateau, or they were sole proprietors or LLCs and had grown to where they needed to go to an accounting firm. Because in CPA firms, folks, most of their clients are not sole proprietors. And they're not sole proprietors because CPAs know the drawbacks of being a sole proprietor, the tax consequences, the audit risks. So there is a huge communication gap, I believe, out there between what the vehicles that are available, which are only a few, the general public, and the professionals serving them. Because if most professionals are like me in a bubble where we're only seeing after the fact, there is a big chasm of education that needs to happen. And as I go through this chapter, I think maybe I'm going to open up some people's eyes to what I'm talking about. Because before 1958, there was no such thing as an S-Corp. There were two types of businesses, basically: corporations and small businesses. Now, corporations cost money. And usually only somebody got to become a corporation if they had money, because now you had to hire an accountant, you usually had to hire a lawyer, you had to have enough money in the business to pay yourself. You had to pay yourself a salary. And most small businesses are on a shoestring. And it was the same thing in 1957 as it is now. So in 1957, you really had two classes of businesses. You had sole proprietors and you had corporations. So what was happening about the thing called wealth? Wealth in the nation was all going to the corporations because they all had the money, folks. Think about it. Investors invested in corporations. So now you can have stockholders. So these corporations had all kinds of money. And then you had the sole proprietors that were stuck. They didn't have a choice. There was no other choice for them. So if you're living on a shoestring, and let's face it, most businesses fail. So if you're living on a shoestring, and so you could see that at the time, as people started realizing this, they were like, hey, there's something wrong with this picture. This is supposed to be the land of opportunity, the United States. You know, all you needed was a dream. So how does somebody go from, you know, living on a shoestring to being the corporation? Well, not many people made it there. And that was the problem. And it became a political problem. It became a political problem for the president, who was Dwight Eisenhower at the time. So what do politicians do? They pass laws so that they can get reelected to make people happy. And what they did basically was they created this S-Corp, and it was supposed to be, listen, this is going to bridge the gap between the wealthy and the not wealthy. It's going to bridge the gap between the small business and the large business. But let me take a step back first. There were other issues. It wasn't just the accumulation of wealth and, you know, keeping the poor guy poor, and the fact that you really had to be extra special to make enough money as a business owner to become a corporation. And not only that, you needed the education. So, and not everybody's got an education. Not everybody goes to business school. And back then there was no internet. So they came up with this. So the other issues were that, you know, sole proprietors had no legal protection. That was a big one. So, you know, if you have a construction company and somebody gets hurt and you have a house, well, you know, all your personal assets are at risk. So that was one drawback to being a sole proprietor. The other one was the taxes. Sole proprietors got no tax benefits, zero. Whatever their profit was at the end of the year, that's what they paid taxes on. Social Security. They didn't get to do any capital gains transactions. They didn't get to invest in their company and leave it there to grow. If they made the money, they had to pay tax. Corporate investors, corporate shareholders had all kinds of other ways to manipulate the tax system. Legally, just like Donald Trump does. So corporate shareholders could have multiple entities. They could have different year ends. They could shift money from one entity to the other. So if you look at this, you got the small guy usually working on a shoestring with no tax benefits. And then you got these wealthy corporation owners with all the tax benefits in the world and sometimes paying nothing in taxes. So what happens, and you see it today, folks, you see these billionaires paying, 15% or 10%, or like Donald Trump paying nothing or $750. It's the same thing today, because proportionately, the sole proprietor that is making $50,000, or if a sole proprietor makes $100,000, they are going to pay over $12,000 just in self-employment tax. Now, if a corporate business owner makes $1 million, okay, they could take out whatever they want in salary, whatever is reasonable. That's a whole nother issue. But they could actually pay less in taxes than the sole proprietor making 10% less. So this was a problem. There was a big gap, and that gap is still here, folks. It's still here, because back in 1958, there were maybe 5 or 6 million businesses. And it's hard to nail down, because to be honest with you, back then, the way that they classified businesses was different than how we classify businesses today. Back then, unless you had a physical location, you weren't a business, basically. So the numbers are a little skewed, but if you just go back, and you could go back, I'm not going to come up with numbers because there's numbers all over the place, but if you go to the US Census, and if you want to go back, and I will gladly provide this info for you if you want, but let's say we had 5 million businesses and 2 million of them were corporations. And the objective of the S-Corp was to bridge that gap. Then somebody needs to explain to me today, how come we have 30 million? We have let's say 5 or 6 times more businesses, but yet we still only have 5 million corporations. So the number of corporations hasn't gone up 5 or 6-fold. And to me, I'm saying this doesn't make sense. There's got to be a reason for it. So, obviously, the intention of creating the S-Corps was never met. Obviously, because if the intention of the lawmakers at that time was to bridge the gap, I don't see that gap being bridged. What I see are sole proprietors being unfairly targeted by the IRS, audited many, many more times than S corporations. So, I had somebody mention to me today that, well, the audit's only a problem if you're not in compliance. Well, let me tell you something about tax audits if you've never been through one. You don't want one. I don't care if your records are pristine, because they will be looking for something. And if you don't have your records in order, which most businesses do not, okay, let's face it, folks, and we're talking about small micro businesses here. Let's talk about reality. Most businesses don't have the right records. Most small business owners commingle personal transactions with business transactions. That's just the way it is. And the IRS knows this, and they're looking for that, folks. So forget about the tax savings. That's on the side. Even though it's a huge benefit, and that was one of the reasons why corporations were invented. I mean, S corporations were invented to give the small guy tax benefits. And when people come to me, because people come to me a lot now that are sole proprietors, and 99.9% of the time I'm telling them that we need to create an S-Corp, because there is absolutely no doubt in my mind, nobody will ever be able to convince me otherwise unless the tax laws change or something else changes. This is the way it needs to be. A small business, a small operating entity, what I'm talking about is not a passive activity, not rental activities, not oil and gas. That's what LLCs were created for. Okay, so LLCs were created for passive investors. S-Corps were created specifically for sole proprietors. And the only reason why out of 30 million businesses and 25 million are still sole proprietors is a question that I just can't answer. Other than the fact that there's a lot of bad information out there. I'm sorry, but there's a lot of bad professionals out there giving misguided advice. People that have never prepared a tax return, people that have never registered a business, people that have never had to answer, multiple state problems. So if you haven't done that and you're not qualified to be talking about who should be an S-Corp, please don't. Please don't, because there are so many business owners that are being misled and misguided. And I don't blame a lot of them for, because when a confused consumer doesn't make a decision, and that is the only explanation I could come up with why this is, why there are so many sole proprietors out there. And, the fact is, if you start talking to people like I have, you start talking to people that have been audited, you'll see the patterns, just like I have. And that's what I base everything I do on. These laws have not changed since I've been an accountant. The only thing that changed was the creation of LLCs, which made this even a lot more complicated. So people are using LLCs for the wrong thing. So they weren't using S-Corps because they were either confused or didn't know. And now we got this other third type of entity, which people think they have a choice of, and they don't, because LLCs don't come with any tax benefits. So that is my story. My amazing itty bitty S-Corp book will be out. If you're watching this later, you'll probably have access to it on Amazon. It will be a #1 bestseller. I know that because my friend Susie Pruden is publishing it, and all she does is create bestsellers. So over the course of the next couple of weeks, each night I'll be doing another chapter. And on tomorrow, I'll be going into basically what I talked about tonight. Who should own an S-Corp? I'll go through some specific scenarios about who exactly should own an S-Corp, and then you can decide if you're one of those people. So that's my story. I'm sticking with it. Joe DiChiara, God bless.